Are you ready for 3 true psychological horror stories that will haunt you long after the video ends? This isn't just a compilation of scary tales. These are real paranormal encounters and unexplained mysteries from the desolate Scottish Highlands to the quiet villages of Sweden, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs into a terrifying psychological experience. Each story is a first-hand account of unexplained events that defy logic, featuring entities that are all too real for those who witness them. From ancient land spirits to spectral ladies, these true scary stories delve into the kind of horror that lingers. The house stood alone on the jagged coast of the Isle of Skye, a stark, gray thing battered by the North Sea winds. I was 10 years old. My sister Isla was 6. After our father left, my mother moved us to this desolate place because the rent was cheap and the isolation was supposed to be healing. But the house did not want to heal us. It wanted to consume us. The wind didn't just blow around the walls. It screamed through the cracks like a dying animal. My mother blamed the drafts for the cold spots, but drafts do not smell like stagnant pond water. Drafts do not watch you while you sleep. It started with the mud. I would wake up and find clumps of wet earth on the floorboards of my room, arranged in a perfect circle near the radiator. I thought Isla was playing pranks, but her eyes were always wide and innocent. Then came the sounds, not the creaking of timber, but the distinct, rhythmic sound of heavy breathing coming from the crawlspace access panel in the ceiling. One night, I stared at that panel. I watched the paint peel. I watched the screws rust. And for a second, just a split second, I saw the panel lift an inch and settle back down silently. Isla stopped sleeping in her bed. I found her curled up on the rug by the window one morning. When I asked why, she whispered that the gray man needed the mattress. She said he was too tall to stand up, so he had to lie down. My blood turned to ice. She spoke about him as if he were a roommate. I dragged her to our mother. I begged her to listen. My mother scrubbed the dishes harder, refusing to turn around. She said the isolation was getting to our heads, that imaginary friends were normal, but I saw her hands shaking. I saw her glance at the hallway shadow with a look of pure dread. The storm that night was deafening. Rain lashed against the glass like gravel. I woke up because the air in my room had changed. It was heavy, thick. I heard a sound that I will never forget, the slow, deliberate slide of a fingernail down the other side of my bedroom door. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate. Then the brass handle began to turn, slowly, painfully. I pulled the duvet over my mouth to stifle a scream. The door creaked open, revealing the pitch-black hallway. A figure stood there. It wasn't a shadow. It was solid. It was dripping wet. It leaned into the room, just ahead, and stayed there, freezing me in place. We moved out 2 months later. We never spoke of the croft. We never spoke of the gray man. 20 years later, I sat with my mother in a bright, modern cafe in Edinburgh. I finally gathered the courage to ask her about the Isle of Skye. I asked her if she thought I was crazy back then. She put down her coffee cup. She didn't look at me. She looked out the window and said, "I didn't want to scare you, Ewan, but I used to wake up and see him standing over your bed. He wasn't a ghost. He was something that came from the soil." She admitted she only slept when the sun came up. I still checked the locks 3 times a night. I still listened for the breathing, because now I know he wasn't imagining us. We were the intruders. I was 10 when we moved. My parents had bought a farm on the edge of a dense, silent forest in Sweden. It was a beautiful, newly renovated farmhouse, far larger than our old apartment. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with tall pine trees. I thought I'd finally be happy. At first, everything felt normal, but then small things began to happen that made me feel uneasy. My room was at the end of the hall, with 2 large windows facing the backyard and a deep closet. I loved it until the first night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard a soft, rumbling sound from the closet. It wasn't loud, just a gentle jostling of clothes being sorted. I peeked inside. I told myself it was just the settling of the house. Most people, even kids, assume the little noises coming from here, and they're just typical household sounds you hear every day. But then I saw the closet door move. It wasn't open, but it was trembling as if someone was pushing it gently from the inside. I wanted to run to my mother's room, but I was frozen. I stayed there until I fell back asleep, still staring at the closet. The next morning, the closet door was slightly ajar, even though I had closed it tightly. I asked my mother if she had gone in there, and she said no. She said maybe the air vents were the culprit, but I knew they weren't. The nights after, that grew worse. I started hearing tapping on the window glass. At first, I thought it was tree branches, but when I looked, there were no branches nearby. The tapping continued for minutes, and when I pulled the blanket over my head, it stopped. I tried to ignore it until one final night when I glanced over. I saw a pale hand pressing on the window. It was outside, but my window was on the 2nd floor, too high to reach without a ladder. The hand stayed there for a long time, just pressing, not moving. Then it slid away and disappeared. I didn't sleep at all that night. I told my mother, and she laughed when I did. She didn't believe me for a moment. When she saw I wasn't joking or making it up, she tried to convince me I was half asleep and seeing things in my dreams. But I knew it was horse manure. My stepfather didn't believe me either. He said I was making it up to get attention and laughed at me too. But I noticed he kept the front door light on at night, so maybe he didn't feel safe as he pretended. After a month, my little brother, who was 4, started talking about the white lady. He said she had come into his room and sat on his bed. My mother thought it was just his imagination, but one night I heard him screaming. I ran in and found him huddled under his blanket, crying. When he finally calmed down, he said the white lady stood at his door, just staring at him. His eyes were all black. I believed him because of what I saw at my window. I started sleeping with the blanket over my head every night, but that didn't stop the nightmares. I started dreaming of the white lady, too. She stood in the corner of my room and whispered my name. Her voice was dry, like tree bark rubbing against itself. Sometimes I would wake up and hear it, dazed, but it was real. One night I woke up and saw her standing at the foot of my bed. She was taller than anyone I had ever seen. Her head almost touched the ceiling. She wore a long white dress that moved even though there was no wind. Her hair was black and thick, and her face was as pale as chalk. Her eyes were like black holes, empty. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, she was gone. But my closet door was wide open. After that, I couldn't go into my closet anymore. I begged my mother to let me sleep in her room, but she said I needed to learn to be brave. I think she didn't want to admit she was also scared. The worst night came during a storm. Heavy rain and strong winds. I woke up to the sound of my window groaning. When I looked, the window was slowly opening. Even though it was locked, I could see the lock turning on its own. I opened the window all the way and saw the white lady enter. She didn't move like a person. She floated. Her legs never touched the floor. She drifted towards my bed and bent until her face was right in front of mine. I felt her cold breath on my skin. She whispered my name again, and this time I screamed as loud as I could. My parents rushed in, but when the light came on, the window was closed and locked, and there was no one else there. They yelled at me for scaring everyone, but I saw fear in their faces. The strange thing about this part of the story is that I don't clearly remember what happened between the moment I saw that lady floating towards me and my scream. The best I can describe is that I lost consciousness for a moment before I remembered screaming and my parents rushing me into the room. The window was closed again, suggesting to everyone that it was just a night terror. That's what my parents believed. I think my mother started taking me to therapy for a while because she was worried about me. We lived in that farmhouse for 3 more years, and I never got used to it. My brother stopped talking about the white lady, but I think it wasn't because she stopped visiting. He was just too scared to talk about it. Sometimes I'd hear him crying in the night and say, "Go away." I think he also didn't want to be forced into therapy. Sometimes when it rains at night, I still feel the fear of getting up to go to the bathroom or get a drink. I look around the corners of the room just to make sure I don't see anything tall hiding there. It shows how these things stick with you, even into adulthood. I'd be more open to believing it was just a night terror if it weren't. For the fact that I saw that hand on my window before my brother ever mentioned the white lady for the first time. I think it's just one of those unexplainable experiences. I was 8 years old, and every afternoon after school I rode my bike until the sky dimmed and dinner smells drifted through open windows. We lived in a small village surrounded by forest in northern Sweden, where pine trees stood close together and silence settled early. The street was short and slightly downhill, paved unevenly, with cracks I memorized without trying. I knew which stones wobbled. I knew where water gathered after rain. I knew when the mail truck arrived and how long it stayed. At the bottom of the hill was the house. It was older than the others, built of dark wood that smelled faintly of moss and wet bark. A long gravel driveway sloped gently upward toward it, bordered by grass that never seemed fully trimmed. Tall trees leaned inward from both sides, making the place feel tucked away from the rest of the street. That was where the man stood. He appeared one afternoon without announcement, positioned exactly where the gravel met the road. He wore a heavy coat and a dark wool cap. Even when the weather was mild, he stood straight, hands folded behind his back, eyes fixed down the street as if he were waiting for something specific. When I rode past, he raised his hand and said hello. His voice was calm, familiar, as though he had been greeting me for years already. I waved back. That became our routine. He was there most afternoons after that. Not every day, but often enough that I began to expect him. Always in the same spot. Always careful never to step onto the pavement. My mother had warned me never to cross the road alone. I took that rule seriously. The man seemed to understand it instinctively. He never invited me closer, never asked me to cross. Instead, he spoke from his side and let the distance remain. He asked about school, about what I was learning, about my bike. When I got a new red bicycle with a bright silver bell, he noticed immediately, said it suited me, asked if I liked the sound it made. I hadn't rung it yet that day. Sometimes he told small stories about birds that nested in the trees near his house, about a neighbor's dog that used to steal shoes and hide them under a porch. Once he joked about a cat that hated rain, and I laughed harder than I meant to. He knew my name quickly, knew that I had a younger cousin who visited often, knew my father had recently bought a different car. I never remembered telling him those things. I assumed he watched the street. Old people notice details. That was normal. Still, there was something about how he spoke that made me feel seen in a way I didn't have words for yet. Not watched, noticed, like I existed more clearly when he looked at me. He once asked if I wanted to race to the corner. I said no. He smiled and said maybe another time. Then, one week, he stopped appearing. The driveway was empty, the gravel undisturbed, the front windows covered by heavy curtains. I slowed my bike the first day he wasn't there, circling once before continuing on. The space he usually occupied felt wrong, like a sentence missing its final word. He didn't return the next day, or the one after that. I asked my mother if I could cross the road and see if he was all right. She said no, said that house wasn't a place for children. Her voice was sharp enough to end the discussion. A few days later, I noticed movement in the back garden. A woman stood there, watering plants. I had never seen anyone else in that yard before. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if the garden demanded care rather than effort. I watched from my bike, pretending to adjust my pedals. She didn't look up. The next time I saw her, she sat on the back steps holding a mug, steam rising into the cool air. She looked tired, older than I expected, like someone returning to a place they hadn't wanted to come back to. That was the day I crossed the road. I waited until the street was empty, until I was sure no one was watching. Then I pedaled hard, gravel crunching loudly beneath my tires as I entered the driveway. Up close, the house smelled of damp wood and old leaves. The air felt cooler, heavier. I stopped near the gate, suddenly certain I wasn't supposed to be there. The woman heard me and turned. Her expression shifted from surprise to mild concern, but not anger. I told her about the man, the one who stood at the end of the driveway, the one who waved, the one who knew my name. She listened quietly. Then she said the man I described sounded like her husband. I smiled, expecting her to say he was inside or resting or away for a while. She didn't smile back. She said he had died the previous winter. Heart failure. Passed quietly in his chair. His name was Eric. The cold that opened in my chest felt real, like stepping into shade after standing too long in the sun. I asked to see a photo. She returned with a small frame. The man wore the same cap, the same gentle smile, but a thin, pale scar ran across his cheek, from ear toward mouth. The man I spoke to had no scar. When I told her that, she shook her head softly and said the scar had always been there, sometimes hidden by shadow, sometimes by angle. She said no one lived in the house now. She only returned in summer to tend the garden. No one stood in the driveway. No one waved at children. I thanked her and left without looking back. Life continued. I found new routes, rode with other kids. The house became just another place I passed without slowing. Weeks went by. Then one night, rain tapped against my bedroom window. Slow, steady, I woke to my name being spoken softly, clearly, from outside. It was his voice, not loud, not threatening, familiar, as though he were standing exactly where he always had. I screamed for my parents. My mother told me it was the wind. My father checked the locks and shone a flashlight into the yard. There was nothing there. They said I had dreamed it. I knew I hadn't, but the voice never returned again. Chapter 5. What stayed with me, years passed. The street changed. The old house was sold, renovated. New people moved in. I grew up, left the village. But sometimes when rain falls late at night, I hear my name in memory. I don't think of it as a ghost story anymore. I think of it as something that knew the rules, something that stayed where it was allowed, something that waited. I never crossed that road again, and I don't think that was a coincidence.